Welcome to the 4D Talks, a podcast about the fourth dimension of architecture, aka all the things that architects should consider in their designs, but often don't. In each episode, my guests and I discuss how this fourth dimension can influence our experience in the built environment and how we could use it to make better architecture that serves people and improves their life. Architects, students, and architecture enthusiasts join the brainstorm and let's discover the fourth dimension together. Today, we will talk about feminism as the fourth dimension of architecture. And for those who don't see the link at the first glance, think about the queues to the female toilets wherever you go. Inequality in this matter is often the result of specific design decisions, and architecture can directly cause inequality on many levels. The good news is that it also means that architecture has tools and power to contribute to creating equality, inclusivity, and equity for every gender. Let's look into it together with my guest, Nourhan Bassam, a feminist urbanist, an author of the book The Gendered City, and the founder of Gaming X, a think tank focusing on sustainable community development with the aim to create social inclusivity. Thank you, Nourhan, for joining me today.
Thank you, Magda, for having me and for having this talk together about fourth dimension in architecture. That is super interesting for me and hopefully for everyone who's listening in it to, as you said, see the link between feminism and architecture and our daily lives and our social constructs, etc. So yeah, I am really pleased to be here.
I'm very happy to hear that. I'm pretty sure that we will cover all aspects of this topic and all scales as well. But I would like to start maybe with examples from architecture where there is clear lack of equality and hopefully also discuss the solutions. And the basic one that comes to my mind is actually toilets. So I was wondering, why do you think, we have so many years of experience on collecting data on that topic. And I'm wondering why the regulations, the building regulations are still so off regarding that topic.
Well, actually, it's this analyzing architecture through a feminist lens is important to recognize and accept the very contradictions and ambiguities and complexities of the matter. So we need to know that it's a reflection of political, social, and economic priorities and decisions that is actually really complex and can be subtle in some ways. So and in the matter of toilets and the line, what I call the line gap, and women being always lined to use restrooms, and as well, it's like designing gender specific spaces such as like restrooms. It's really much contextual, as I said. So if it's like we decided to design gender neutral washrooms to be more egalitarian or inclusive in that sense for maybe transgender identities, but in some contexts it's not that people are not comfortable using like mixed sexes toilets or restrooms. So it's we can always look for how the society and socially acceptable norms of the society can work. And this is how architecture in that sense can be sensitive and responsive to the needs of people. And you need to ask a lot of questions as a designer and architect. What do people need? And if it's like equal numbers of stalls for both men and women's toilet, but we know that women's use more time than men in restrooms. So is it maybe more number of stalls or maybe family restrooms as like a mid intersecting like a mixed place for caregivers, maybe with children to have this like family restroom that they can use both men and women, or it can be the gender neutral washroom that all genders are accepted to go there, but then it's for some religions, some cultures, it's not like as well. People can be afraid for the safety maybe of their girls or women going to these restrooms. So it's always like the cultural norms and practices in mind is widely depending on the community or region or the place we are designing in our buildings, it's concerns about cultural sensitivity. So we need to widely research and conduct research and engage communities in the place you're designing in for a better understanding for the unique needs and perspectives of different genders and minorities and identities, to be sensitive in mind, like having this cultural sensitivity in mind. So I think this is my point of view, but the thing is, why feminist literature or theories and feminist analysis of architecture is still, I think, since 40 years ago when it started, first like theorists and feminists that are critical about architecture, it's still not really much, as you said. It's still questions. It's still in theory. It's still it's not being implemented. It's like rediscovered over the years, over and over again, and yet we still have this lack of maybe feminist lens or feminist sensitive design still. So
I think it's super interesting what you're saying, and actually, I started the topic thinking this is basically a very simple question. Also, we often consider that as a very simple design question. You just take the norms, you build that amount of toilets, as little space they take. But actually, it is a super important aspect of a design, considering cultures, considering different constructs of societies, religion, and so on. My idea was like, the next question I wanted to ask you is, then is gender neutral toilets a solution? Which you also mentioned that it
can be, yeah.
In some cases, maybe it would work, but you have to take so many other things into account. I would maybe go one step further with that question. And let's think about office design here. Office design for fields that are mostly dominated by men, like, for example, engineering, maybe banking, IT, and so on. So, on one hand, I think we should follow the brief from the client and fulfill their requirements. So if the requirement is to focus on male toilets, make them more comfortable, make more of them, and not design more than necessary female ones because they will simply not be used, then, it's basically just following the brief from the client. One could also argue that focusing on female toilets in places where they simply wouldn't be used would be just a waste of money. On the other hand, I am wondering if by doing so, are we also maybe negatively contributing to, the continuation of this image of male-dominated or reserved by men, for men professions? What do you think about it? Or is it too far-fetched?
No, this is actually the main argument of like the analysis of the feminist analysis of architecture, that it should be interested in women's place in society, in gender relations. It's really reflecting what you said, women's place and their experience in this spaces or in these places. And the aim of feminist analysis of architecture is to unlock actually this male domination, male as a norm patterning of our built environment for years and years. So when we say that cities and the buildings and housing prototypes, they were designed by and for men for too long, we are not really exaggerating, but this is the case, or this is how it was in actually, as far as design itself is concerned, it is one size fits male. It is the male is a norm. And this, we were trying to unpattern this norm. We're trying to challenge this norm and showing how the physical fabric actually contains one particular set of ideas of social relations at the expense of others. It's only focusing on men's social relation, men going back and forth to their work, and neglecting maybe the women's needs, women travel pattern, women space and place in society. And when we are designing constantly and without unquestionably for men for decades, this is actually what exacerbating the inequalities, I would say. So in a society built on around the individual man, or the male as a norm, with their mobility, well, then we can see that women are restricted. It is like women are now less mobile when you are designing transport and commutes only for men. there's less mobility, maybe less sense of security, the physical activity is hindered. So as you said, it's really the feminist analysis of architecture and the urbanism. It is to challenge all the norms and to relook and change for more inclusive design.
I think the approach to designing in different scales is also very different. At least when I was preparing for this episode, it felt like with interior design, it's really about making sure that you know who you're designing for. For example, also taking thermal comfort. On average, women need 2 degrees more to feel comfortable in a space than men, and 2 degrees is actually quite a lot. But then there are also easy solutions to fix that, like just, have sensors or controllers for the temperature. Or also, I don't know, when you're designing a kitchen, maybe don't follow Neufert necessarily, who's going to, like the book that is going to show you the heights. Actually, in this case, mostly taken into account female heights, but just make sure that you know who you're designing for, right? And there are also ways to calculate the right heights. So, well, actually, there's one more thing that I wanted to talk about regarding the architectural scale, which is the visualizations and the renders and what kind of people we put in these images, because that also seems still to be very sexist. And from my experience, also when I see visualizations, when you're designing a restaurant, you're probably going to put a female waitress serving food. And then when you're designing an office for a bank, it's probably going to be a man. Also a very specific type of people that would be white, good-looking men working out a lot and sexy women wearing heels. And I'm wondering if, like with the storytelling through images that we're creating, you're also creating some kind of image of the society or what you think successful space is. And does a successful office space really mean one specific type of people working there? It's something that I'm also questioning, and I would like people to be a bit more aware what kind of characters they actually put on their renders.
Yeah, exactly. And what you are actually this subliminal messages that is as well stereotyping how you see these women, or maybe a worker in a certain ethnicity, or the director should be this white heteronormative patriarchal male that we know, and this should be that, and it's really, I think it's really funny because as well, maybe in the kitchen you put the housewife usually doing this, and with the stroller you usually put the image of a lady woman that should be taking care after children. So it's, I think, this misogynistic and like gender role that is still very much rooted in our societies, and it's always this like image of certain people doing certain thing, and it's only this way, and it has been for years and years, as we mentioned. And I think this rootedness of these ideas is still what's like, after all of the efforts you can do like in designing for equality or for inclusiveness, yet you would have these stereotypes. And when I put this in a render, or I designed this for certain identities, then I am perpetuating these inequalities visually. And of course, visually it's super important. And for the kids, for different generations, they are raised up seeing this already, like the past generations are like that. So we hope that the future generations, they can see a different image when they grow up. And of course, as designers, it's super important to take care and be very much concerned with what our product, even if it's only visuals, that what are we perpetuating, what we are like hiddenly passing through generations and generations coming.
Exactly. I think architects should really be more aware of that. What I think architectural scale does is we can actually control it a little bit better by making sure we design something that really fulfills our clients' requirements, right? But I think in the urban scale, it's a bit of a different topic, because the topic of inclusivity becomes much more apparent there, considering the perception of safety between men and women, considering mobility, like you mentioned, access to some economic and social opportunities. And these really seem to vary between genders. And what's your, I mean, I know that that's basically your main field of expertise. So I'd like to know what's your conclusion on that topic? What are your main findings?
Yeah, it's definitely true, but as well, architecture, when you are not designing for a certain client, you're maybe designing housing prototypes like Victorian terrace houses that are like putting kitchens maybe in the backward and only women like single-handedly did the cooking for the family and like the Schroeder house in Utrecht in the steel movement. And it was really early in like 1924. It was commissioned by a single woman with her 3 children, and she has really challenged this household and housework prototypes with open kitchen and like open terrace with the environment, and it was really a revolution in the housing prototypes in that time. So it's as well how like we are perpetuating, as we mentioned, certain gender roles in the society. It's important to tackle as well with design. So of course in the urban context where everybody is connecting and making their own with different scale, of course, and different backgrounds of people and different intersectional layers as well of people, we can see that the urban environment, as we mentioned, transportation can be, for too long, it was designed by and for men, and neglecting what we know as thrift chaining and women's unpaid care work, taking kids out and to school and to daycares, and actually the proximity of all of this between their work as well, and all of these transportation hinders. And then of course we know that with the pay gap, women earn less, and mainly if a household has a car, it's the man who is driving the car. So women are the pedestrians, and they're mainly 2/3 of people using public transportation. So it's as well hindering when all the transportation systems are designed to go to work in the morning and then back from work at like in the evening, and all of the grocery shopping, it's called like leisure activities, but it's not, and it's neglected within the design. So this is an aspect of transportation. And of course, not only men and women, but women in different lifespan and the intersectional layer, women of color, ethnicities and class, sexual identities, the perception as well of the safety and security, and how we can see that it can hinder them from maybe doing physical activity after dark, or not being able to go to certain spaces or dark areas or dead ends, that streets that are not well lit. So as well, they are restricted in the city, and as we call it, the right to the city needs to be gendered, and the right to the city should be for everyone, and we all should enjoy cities equally. So of course, urban design is exacerbating a lot of inequalities already existing. And in terms of as well, as we said, that in the same age span, like a teen girl different from a small girl, different from like a woman in working, and then maybe a caregiver and an aging woman. So all of these spectrums as well in certain gender, they as well experience cities differently.
Could we maybe try to link those issues directly with the three-dimensional world? Like, for example, you mentioned that safety, I think it's quite a clear thing that women feel less safe in cities, in parks than men. And one of the solutions here is to make sure that the spaces are lit up enough, right? Another thing I heard was that, for example, narrow paths in parks also make women feel less comfortable and less safe, especially when there are bushes growing around those narrow paths. These are paths that women would not necessarily take in the dark. What are the other elements that you see as those differences that architecture or in general design could actually do something about?
So yeah, with safety, we are saying factors such as poor lighting, maybe lack of security measures, inadequate design features. Women, when they were asked, they wanted like to see and be seen in the most times. So if there's like an area that, as you said, that is maybe in a certain like curve or within the bushes, and people cannot see anymore what's happening or be seen, then they would feel threatened in the sense. So visibility and designing for visibility is really important for creating this safe and secure spaces. So women would definitely and be hesitant to go like in a parking lot or a walkway that is a dead end, or maybe tunnels that are maybe in the dark, or maybe tunnels that are long and at some point can get dark and darker in the darker times, or hidden or secluded. So all of these we can of course avoid by design. And as transportation, for instance, in some countries it worked like safe transportation, like compartments for women's maybe cars in metro lines. So in India and so in some parts in Africa, it's like in the metro you can have this only women compartment for transportation. So this can work as well. So it's really contextual, but you can start by knowing what's happening. And this is a question that I raised in my project: why cities keep failing women, and it's a way to voice all and amplify why women feel like the city failed them in a way or another, whether they are teen girls, whether they are women, and they are caregivers with their kids. So you need to know what as well went wrong a bit, and what is threatening, what is what for too long was like what's holding them from going there or here, and then you can as well I think implement toolkits and policies, design frameworks to create, I think, more like valid design tools for designers to, okay, so now on, like, we cannot design something that is not sustainable or with a non-sustainable material. We cannot design this and this because it's not gender appropriate or it's not inclusive. So I think it's really important as well to the localizing effect of the physical environment. As we said, it's really contextual and localized and cultural, and really you have to be sensitive.
Yeah, that's actually you mentioned a very interesting thing about teenage girls and their place within the society. A couple of episodes ago, I had a talk about children as the fourth dimension of architecture. Mm-hmm. And at that point, we concluded that basically we design for children with the playgrounds, we design for adults with bars and everything else, but we often completely leave the teenagers, and we don't really provide spaces for them to grow, to also stay healthy, spend time outside. Mm-hmm. But then I came across this very interesting initiative. It's somewhere in the UK. It's called Make Space for Girls.
Yeah,
and
course.
That's basically, they're doing an amazing job, really. Their statement is that, and I completely agree with that, something that I haven't really thought about is that actually we do sometimes design spaces for teenagers, but it's mostly for boys, mm-hmm. which means putting money into football fields, BMX tracks, or like skate parks, where currently there are still the majority of people using it would be still boys. And that really leaves girls completely out of place and out of feeling of some kind of identity within the society. Mm-hmm. Before, I didn't really think this is an issue, but actually we should put much more attention to how they spend time, especially these days where there are so many other dangers online that yeah. teenagers can run into.
Mm-hmm. Of course, Make Space for Girls, and Susanna and Imogen, they're doing great work, and we hope that we can see this in many cities around the world, and they are raising a really important question and design aspects as well, that and aggregating data now with the recent like Park Watch project is super cool, and data is really important in that sense. I would stress on gathering sex desegregated data to check these differences, and asking as well what would you prefer, or why you are not maybe using this area or that, and try to improve its design to be more like appealing for them, and to see how it can be located with maybe more adequate facilities, etc.
Exactly. The other thing that I wanted to talk with you is your projects. So we're talking about two things. One is the Gendered City and one is the Gaming X. What are those two initiatives about?
Yeah, so Gaming X, it's about a think tank. It helps marginalized groups to have their place in the city. So it's about maybe fostering creative ways to enable active citizen participation, but mainly for marginalized kids. So it's placemaking projects, it's empowering communities to shape their own neighborhood, and it explores gender sensitive practices and theories, and how to embody it in the built environment with mainly co-design and the active citizen participation, and to be involved in designing their neighborhoods, etc. So it's still small. I'm still trying to expand and in different directions. And the gender city, it is my passion and my actually like personal passion as a feminist. As long as I remember, I call myself a feminist, and it's merging my passion with city design. So it explores as well some urban issues that are merging, like the 15-minute city, physical activity, and a green gap, and a feminist park and recreational areas. So it's tackling some of the urban issues we have, safety and security. But it's a bit as well, a radical feminism there plays a part with history about how cities were built on gendering, as we mentioned, and gender roles and gender constructs, and how it has been going, and some of the personal experiences of myself as a feminist wandering some gender cities, because I have this a diverse upbringing from different parts of the world. So I'm mentioning this in the book, and it's actually soon, hopefully, to be published. It's
Fingers crossed. I will definitely share that. That's news whenever that comes.
Thank you. And the gender city, it actually as well now. I'm trying to have this advocacy and representing more of the women's work towards the gender responsive design and feminist geographies. So it has become as well like a project for advocacy and for merging some initiatives and amplifying voices, because it drew from my series that I've mentioned, how cities are failing women. So it's this questionnaire and surveying, gathering data as well, and amplifying women's voices, maybe from different parts of the world, the less privileged, now discussing like line gap and the toilet lines and etc. But then many parts of the world, they don't have infrastructural sanitation, and women maybe need to go more than 4 kilometers a day back and forth to collect water, and it's really heartbreaking to read these women's stories and to know these women's struggles every day when they feel harassment, and so that a long way to go to address the inequalities they are facing. So,
and in that sense, I think design, architecture, and urbanism plays a huge role.
Definitely.
I think that also makes me think that if we're trying to design equal cities, equal spaces, how can we actually do it when the field that we're coming from is actually lacking equality? So could we maybe discuss also feminism in the architectural field itself? What's your experience in that topic?
Yeah, actually, it's a part of my interest to know the archives and architecture. I would say, because I was in Copenhagen with this amazing women doing great job about archiving and the historiographical bias in archives, tackling architecture and landscape. So in Copenhagen, they tell me in the beginning they were issuing a book about women in architecture in Copenhagen, and then the first instance they would say like it's a no book, it's like one pager or less, and this is the first instance. And when they dug deeper for years, about many of the famous projects and buildings there, they actually found out that many of them are designed by women and usually under the office name, or maybe their partners that the man's name is written on the project. So it's this as well, archives in architecture, where we can find a lot of biased data. So archivists have done many decisions along the year who what is deemed important to be put in archives and what is not. So they eliminated a lot of work, I would say, for women, and especially women of color. And this is a common bias in archives we see in architecture and in our urban planning. It's underrepresentation of certain groups. So it's really limited. And I can say this, like this Copenhagen experience is in each city around the world. So in the first instance, you would say, oh, so there were no famous architects in this country that who are females. And then when you dug deep and you see what the archives have left behind and what was not highlighted and what was not even archived, you would see that it was like intentional bias that needs to be addressed. Yeah, of course, with the pay gap as well, and of course, women of color, and marginalized identities, and individuals with disabilities, you would see none. So yeah, it's really nice as well as tutors and architects and archivists to educate people about female history in architecture and to amplify these projects. So yeah, it's been for many years women underrepresented in the field.
Yeah, I experienced that recently myself. I was at a meeting with a person that we were supposed to work with, and he was a man, like a 50+ man, and his first question to me was, also, are you representing the architect? To which I really felt obliged to say, no, I am the architect. And that really made me think, like, why, I understand it might be looking better younger than older, but are we still in the place in Europe or in general in the 21st century where a young looking woman is representing someone, So I was really surprised by that. One thing is to talk about it broadly so that the world understands that there are more women, but even in the field of architecture itself, we also have that issue. Like, we have to educate internally as well, even though, we know about Jane Jacobs and Zaha Hadid, but that's unfortunately very often where our knowledge about female architects ends. So first, let's start from the insights and then bring it further. Okay, I think, well, we've been talking for a while already, so I will try to maybe wrap it up somehow, maybe with making some kind of definition of feminist design, or what do you think would be like the main checklist of what a feminist design would be?
So it can, like architecture and urban design can be feminist in many ways. It can challenge the patriarchal norms that historically shaped our cities and our lives and our built environment. And it can promote for gender equity and social justice. And we can try now to prioritize the needs and vision and experience of marginalized communities, including women. And as I say, always feminism is not about men and women, and it's not gender. It's not like a man-hating movement. It is about this base of equality, and for the 99.9%. So it's including women, it's including sexual minorities and the disabled, the people of color, different classes. So it's really about putting everyone's perspective on the table and designing for their needs and for their equal experience in our cities and buildings. And it raised the question of who plans cities and who plans our buildings that we live in all of our time. So we know that cities, we shape cities, and hence it shapes us, and it's super true. So it is a really powerful tool to shape this urban settings and architecture, because what we design is ultimately what is building us and what is making us who we are. I think this is ultimately the goal of feminist urbanism.
Yeah, and I also believe that once we start designing for all the genders, men will also feel great in this space. So it doesn't have to be exclusive, right? That's the most interesting thing about it.
Yeah, it's not a pie everyone's taking a bite of. It's not man hating. It's not excluding men.
And the other thing that we should take into account is that I actually found once this definition of equality driven design is that it's a design that treats all users equally while acknowledging their differences. I think that's also a very important part. So like you're saying, do a research before you start designing something. Make sure you know who you're designing for. Take into account all possible scenarios, from age through religion, through gender, and so on. I think I would like us all to learn that from this episode is that bad design really causes inequality. That's one thing, and that architects have responsibility to prevent that. And at the same time, I think we also showed that we have tools as architects to contribute to creating inclusive environments for all the communities. Architects take these tools and make a difference. Thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. To avoid the fear of missing out, make sure you follow 4D Brainstorm here and on the other social media platforms like Instagram and LinkedIn. If you want to share your thoughts on this topic or would like to know how exactly this fourth dimension could be implemented in your design, just simply send an email to 4dbrainstorm@gmail.com. I'm really looking forward to exploring it further with you. Last but not least, if you're interested to know more about what I do, you can also check out the website 4dbrainstorm.com, a platform for free brainstorming in all dimensions and fields. Join the brainstorm and let's discover the fourth dimension together. Till next time!